Welcome to the Roundtable, Wendy. We're so
Thank you so
happy to
much for
have
having me
you.
here today.
Yes, yes. So we're going to hop right into our discussion.
hmm
Advocacy is often talked about as policy or systems change, but it's also deeply personal. How has your experience as a parent shaped your understanding of advocacy as an act of care?
Well, I think that the difference, I guess, for me as it being an act of care is because I started doing advocacy because of my daughter. So you mentioned her at the beginning in the introduction, Jamia, and I really appreciate that. And and so the advocacy started when she was really young and even before she was even in the schools because of the needs that she had. And I think that the idea of care is because you're not just fighting for an idea, which still is admirable, but you're
Yeah.
fighting to protect a person, and in this instance, a very vulnerable person. So I would say that's how that shaped my advocacy, beginning with my daughter. And then, of course, it's evolved as she's gotten older.
Yes, that's wonderful, Wendy, and thanks so much for sharing. There's still a lot of misinformation and stigma surrounding autism, especially with individuals who have complex or co-occurring conditions. What are some of the ways we can help to effectively challenge harmful misconceptions and just people having that misinformation?
I think the way to challenge that is by telling what really happens in our lives. Um, and I say that because people who don't share our experiences don't understand our, what happens on a daily basis in our own realities. And so what they might get it from is media or,
Yeah.
and then they'll think about like, oh, well, I saw this show and it had a person with autism on it. So that's how people are who have autism. And that is one example, maybe a really great example of
Yeah.
someone who has autism. But it doesn't give you like the full range of experiences that are out there. And I think that's what's important is to keep telling those stories and basically to address any kind of stigmas that might also be associated with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that that's probably the best way to is just to keep telling and sharing those examples.
Thank you so much. And speaking of stories, your podcast, Let's Plant Houses, centers around real stories from families navigating IDD. What have you learned about your role in storytelling and how that plays in shifting public understanding and influencing change?
Well, I find that there's a lot like we just talked a little bit about public understanding. In addition to, probably what people see in media and what they see, on TV or whatever it is, they also hear numbers, right? So there's numbers like 1 in 36 people have autism. But what does that really mean? Because and I'm just saying that number because that's the latest, I think, CDC statistic, but that could change. Knowing the numbers is not enough, and that the stories really help to build empathy because it's that way you kind of understand where people are coming from.
Yeah.
And especially if they are a parent and you're a parent, you can probably understand, what's really happening in their lives. So I think that the stories really, really matter in making that a reality for other people who don't live that every day.
Yes, and also, with the sharing of stories, it's like a support group as well because you're like, oh, they're going through the same thing or similar as I am in my family. So I think it is really important to share those stories as a support.
That's a great point. That absolutely it helps people who are sharing that experience so they don't feel like they're alone.
Yes, absolutely. And you've worked in both fundraising and organizational strategy, and as a caregiver. Where do you see gaps between systems and in lived experiences? And how can organizations better align with families who have those needs?
So the biggest gap that I'm seeing is that a lot of the funding, whether that be nonprofit organizations, government organizations, whoever it is that's actually supporting the families. So I see that there's a lot of support for young children. And I think that's fantastic because you're giving these kids a great foundation and a place to start.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm not seeing as much of is what happens after the kids age out of the school systems. And part of that's not only schools, but it's also typically where a lot of the insurance coverage here in Michigan kind of ends. So, and it becomes much harder to find that pediatrician. It gets harder, it's harder to find housing. It's harder to find transportation when people become adults. And so I see that that's probably the biggest gap between what families really need right now is they need support to figure out what the next steps are, because right now it's a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and for our state, we're lucky enough that you can be in the school system till you're 26. Most states, I think it's like 21 or 22. So we are getting several more years of support. But even then, it is not clear what the next steps are for families. And so then it's relying on the families and how long they can maintain that support.
Mm-hmm.
So whether, in their home. So like, are they going to have their loved one live with them till the adults, the parents are 80 and their loved ones in their 50s? And then what happens? So it's about all those next steps after they age out of the majority of the infrastructure here in the state.
Yes, I totally agree. And it's not a coincidence that you mentioned the areas of housing and transportation and mental health and, those vital areas that you see those gaps. And those are pillars of our statewide independent living council's plan, focusing in on those areas because those are where the needs are.
Yeah.
There are individuals and organizations doing this work well across the state of Michigan. What are some autism advocates and organizations you believe are moving the needle and really doing the work and getting it right?
So like I said, the organizations that I would probably focus on, and because selfishly, my daughter's an adult, so that's where my focus is going to be. And it's on those types of resources. So I would say that individually be organizations who are doing the work on the ground. So it'd be like a living and learning center, which is in Northville. But they're not just for Northville. They're for like pretty much anybody who wants to come and receive their services. But they're not only doing a ton of classes and workshops and just fun things with kids, like I don't even know. They just have a lot of social groups, which end again after school. And so it's just another connection point, but they're also doing this huge initiative to employ people. So they have doubled down on employment just this past year. I also said that I volunteer with My Work Matters here in Michigan. They're a smaller outfit, but again, focused on people with disabilities and finding employment. They just opened their second coffee shop. So they just did that in January, which is really cool. And they don't just train people to be in their coffee shop. They also teach them a lot of other transferable skills as well. So I like the organizations that are doing some things for people right here, again, on the ground. My daughter is actually at the Eisenhower Center in Ann Arbor. They are so she lives there on campus. There's 80 people, I think, with autism on campus alongside her. They provide like all kinds of, obviously caregiving, but they also support therapies. She's still going to school because she'll be 23 this year. So she can still be in the school support till she's 26. So she's still going to Washington Public Schools. She's in Special Olympics. So she's got access to a meaningful adult life that we're kind of wrapping around her. And so again, finding housing. So I think it's those organizations that are really focusing on housing. They're really focused on transportation. I actually haven't seen anybody really master the medical or medical needs. So whether that be mental health access, whether that be, like a lot of the parents I talk to, their kids are still seeing their pediatrician and they're in their 20s because they cannot find a PCP. So I'm not seeing that part so much yet where you have enough access for dental, primary care, that sort of thing. So I think that's probably the next thing. But all of those pillars are really important, but those are the few organizations that come off that I'm thinking about right now.
That's great. And congratulations to your daughter for,
Thank you.
really diving in and get all that she needs. That's amazing.
It's been a journey, let me tell you. It was not easy. And that's the other thing is I'd like to share is that it needs to be easier and clearer for parents what their next steps could potentially be. Ours were not.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Totally agree. And, you mentioned your daughter navigating adulthood, which brings those challenges that you spoke about and the realities. So, what does meaningful support look like across the lifespan for people with autism and their families? And you kind of mentioned where we were falling short. So, ideally, what would be helpful? Something that you didn't mention that would be helpful for an adult navigating through adulthood with autism.
Well, I guess the thing is that it's a little bit different. Like the spectrum for autism is so wide. So I will tell you that from my perspective, I'm going to talk more about people who need greater support because that's, again, my personal journey. That's my experience. Obviously, someone who needs less support is going to will probably require different things. Mm-hmm. So, for example, there's an organization called SAIL, it's a long thing, like it's like solutions, something. I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it is an organization that helps parents with housing who do not need something as intense, we'll call it, as my daughter's support. So in other words, where you're looking for roommates and you're trying to partner together to find like a unique apartment living situation or, but not a group home. So something where they're actually more integrated in the community. And so they're doing a good job trying to educate parents about what their options are so they can put that together. So it just depends. So I would say meaningful support means that we're trying to support all the different facets. So in other words, across, the different levels of need. My daughter is a very high level of need, which I've already said, there isn't enough housing. So I can just tell you that right now. And actually the other thing that is missing as well is when there is a need for mental health support here in the state, there isn't a clear way to get it. So they tell you to go to the emergency room. And the thing is, the emergency room is wonderful if you have something that's broken or you need some kind of care, like, that's just like immediate in that way. But when we're talking about mental health support, it's a lot harder for those ERs and it's not really what they do. Their job is to get you from there to your actual placement. And when my daughter went through this process, because we went through a crisis period and we had to go through the emergency room a couple of years ago, they told us in the ER that there were only 4 psychiatric facilities that could take someone with a primary diagnosis of autism in our entire state. And you had to wait for a bed to open. And if you happened to be there when a bed opened, great. But if you didn't, then they would just send you home. So that's the other thing I think that's really broken, is that for people who need that additional support, there isn't a clear way to get it.
Yes, and that is very unfortunate. But with organizations and mediums like this, hopefully we can get those stories out and, that the support can just be greater and across the board and across the state. So if someone, Wendy, wanted to contact you in regards to advocacy and other resources, where would they find you?
Sure. So first of all, I want to say that if anybody wants to find me also to be a guest on Let's Plant Houses, I want to put that out there too, because I'd love to have them on the show. So what I do on Let's Plant Houses is I tell the stories of parents or adult siblings who have loved ones with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So that could be something like autism, Down syndrome, anything that falls under that category. I want to hear your story. So with that being in mind, if you want to reach out to me for Let's Plant Houses, or like Jamia said, whether it be for advocacy or anything else, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. So Wendy Ernzen, you can find me. I'm happy to connect that way. You can also find me on letsplanthouses.com. So I have a website set up and you can find me there. If you just want to listen to the show, we're on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. But yeah, please reach out because I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. We really enjoyed having you today and just sharing your story and your wealth of knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Welcome.